Hey, it's Matthew Giorgio. In this video, I want to help you make your website and your web apps more accessible for people who may have challenges with their vision impairment, hard of hearing, or physical mobility. Depending on the industry you work in and the company or organization you work in, this may be a legal requirement for you to make sure that your online resources are fully accessible. But even if it's not a requirement, it's certainly a good idea to make your resources available and usable by everyone. And I'm going to show you some quick tips on how to do that in a very helpful tool that we use at our company to make our programs accessible. So let's take a quick look here. So I'm going to show you a tool called WAVE, W-A-V-E, and it's made by this nonprofit organization. I think it's out of a university called WebAim. So if you go to webaim.org, you'll get this tool. I use a Chrome browser extension so I can turn it on whenever I want. So let me show you how it works. So let's switch over to this one. This is one of our websites. This is Business XP. And I'm going to check to see how accessible this is simply by going to the website, which is where I'm at now. And then I'm going to click to enable the Wave evaluation tool. Here it is here. Let's go ahead and turn it on. And boom, now it's on. Now what you can see here, it's instantly done an evaluation of my HTML, or the code behind the scenes here, to see how accessible this may be for people with three types of issues. And there's three types of issues you're dealing with accessibility. The first is vision. So can people see what you have on screen? And that could be based on color contrast. So if you have colors that are too close to each other, it may be hard for people to see that. Or it could be full blindness where somebody has to use a screen reader to read the text. And that becomes actually particularly challenging. The second type is people who are hard of hearing. So if you have any type of audio playing on your website or web app or game or whatever it is that you're creating, if that audio is critical to understanding and progressing through your experience, then you have to provide an alternative so that anyone who is hard of hearing can still progress through the typical system. The third is physical mobility. So if somebody is unable to use a mouse and they might use just a keyboard or some other device that emulates a keyboard, then your site or app has to be functional using just a keyboard. And that's usually using a tab key or an arrow key to switch from one control to the other. So what this tool does is it gives you an instant view of what may or may not be working. And it's more on the visual side and screen reader side than it is for keyboard. A keyboard is something you have to actually test manually. And also anything that's audio based, you have to test that manually. But here, it'll help us with the visuals of the site. So I can see instantly that it's identifying one error on our site, so it's something we'll have to look at. It's also identifying one contrast error. 7 alerts. So alerts may or may not be errors. They're just kind of calling this to your attention. And then some other elements here, which I won't go into too much detail. But if you click on the Details tab, it'll actually show you, and using these icons that you can see, what may or may not be missing. So you can see it's telling me I have one error. It's missing alt text. So if I can find that particular icon, I can fix that alt text that may be missing. There's also a contrast error. If I scroll down here, I can see it here. So it's telling me that this color, this is kind of a dark blue font, on this yellow could be a contrast issue. So that's something I may want to consider. If there's enough contrast there, I may want to turn this to black in order to give it even more contrast. And then there's some alerts here regarding heading levels. So, website usually has like different headings, H1, H2, H3, H4, and so on. And it's suggesting that I've skipped a heading in terms of the design. And that might be something that we might want to look at. So it's not necessarily an error. It's just calling our attention to it so I can look at the structure. So this is the structure of the website. So you can see the website does not have an H1 tag, which may or may not be okay. It depends on what we're trying to do here. And then has no H3. It jumps to an H4 tag. And these are you may not be able to read that easy, but that's these three boxes right here. And you can show you, it shows me that these are H4 tags in terms of the font size and structure of the document. So nice tool to help quickly identify potential issues. And this is a free tool, by the way, so you can just quickly install it and check any site or app. Now, that's a website. Websites are relatively easy to make fully accessible. What becomes really difficult is if you actually have an app, an interactive app. And here at my company, we develop the most complex, comprehensive, engaging type games and simulations for education. And these are particularly difficult to make accessible. So sometimes we have to go to extremes, and I'll show you an example of this. So this is one of our business simulations, online head-to-head multiplayer business simulation. And you can see the interface as very visual, very graphical. There's all sorts of menus, all sorts of data, and it would really be impossible for us to make this fully accessible in its format that you're looking at right now. Primarily because there's so much information, and it's hard if you close your eyes and try to visualize navigating this as somebody who may be blind would have to do. It would be incredibly difficult, and they're usually going to have to use a screen reader, and a screen reader trying to just read text and help you understand what's going on the screen would be too difficult. It's hard to understand the context, and that's the challenge, is missing context. And there are some tags in accessibility which allow you to include context, but again, this simulation interface that you see here is just too visually rich, too complex for a screen reader to interpret properly and then read back to someone. So for this simulation, what we had to do is actually create a completely different interface specifically for people who may be vision impaired or are using a screen reader. So here's an example of this interface. So you can see here, there, I'm going to zoom out here. There is the interface. So you can see it's a much simplified interface. Here's our hamburger menu where we can navigate to different areas of the simulation, different screens. So this interface, as simplified as it is, still gives you access to the same information that this much more visually rich interface provides, so that someone who's using a screen reader can actually still participate in this simulation. In fact, this same interface, I'll give you another tip here, because as you can imagine, it costs a lot of extra development time and effort to build a completely second interface for a simulation. So one of the things you can consider when balancing the cost and the ROI is that this interface also works well on a mobile smartphone, a mobile device, a small screen device. So this interface here would not work well on a small phone. It would still function technically, but there's so much information that you'd squeeze into a small phone that you wouldn't be able to read it well or click the buttons or tap the buttons. And so we use this second interface to double as both a mobile interface for smartphones, but also our accessible interface. And I can apply the same wave tool. Let's do that here. I can apply the same wave tool and check out the interface. So you can see there's no errors. Let me zoom in here. There's no errors at all. No contrast errors, and 11 alerts. So we've done a good job with this interface of making sure it is fully accessible and ADA compliant and other compliance specifications that you have to follow. So you can see we've got some alerts, and I can review those to see if they're a problem. Now, we've already reviewed them, so we know they're not an issue. But this is how you can make your website and web apps more accessible for people with disabilities and align with the legal requirements that you may have, or even, again, if it's not legal requirements, it's always a good thing to make your programs accessible for everyone and give everyone the ability to benefit from your products and services as much as possible. I hope you find this helpful. I'm Mathew Giorgio.